You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glen Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glen Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology. And today we're going to be speaking to Jonathan Godbey, a finance professor at Georgia State University and part of the Georgia FinTech Academy, about some ongoing research that he's been doing along with his classes, and that, frankly, I've been doing a little bit of assistance on it as well as part of the Technology Association of Georgia, on consumer banking attitudes of a broad population with a focus on Generation Z, and it's yielded some unexpected findings that I think you're going to find pretty interesting. So that'll be coming up in just a second. I will remind you, you can always find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out our website, big-fintech.com, and we've got other ways you can get in touch, which I will mention in just a second. First off, in my mind, the biggest news of last week, if you haven't paid attention already, I'm guessing it's probably come across your screen, Circle, the stablecoin company, fintech company, some people might call them a crypto company, went public on Thursday, and I would say that the market reception was, let's say, enthusiastic. It has to be, I'm not sure if I've seen a specific number, but it's got to be among the most successful initial public offerings in the last several years. They priced the initial price at above the high end of their original expectations. When the company actually opened on Thursday, it had shot to almost double that price. It actually wound up having to stop trading because of the high demand a couple times that first Thursday morning. It ended the first day more than double in terms of its price. It actually went up even further on Friday to triple. It closed at $107 compared to a $31 original IPO price. And as I'm recording this, it looks like it actually did the unthinkable this morning. It briefly spiked to over quadruple its price just over the course of a 3-day trading window. It's receded. It's hard to call it receding when it's still sitting in the 120s. But it's a pretty phenomenal story, and it shows that there is some significant demand, A, for new stock offerings, and B, I think we can have a debate over exactly which aspect of it is really attracting the attention. Is it a fintech company? Is it a play in stablecoin? Is it a play in Bitcoin / altcoin / crypto? I guess we're going to figure that out as time goes on, and I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I also think that the folks at Chime are watching extremely closely because they were already in the process. They had applied for their initial public offering, and there was talk that it may be happening as early as this week. I have got to believe they are doing everything in their power to strike while the market is hot, because they are a similar enough company. You could actually argue this is just a good solid indicator for the IPO market in general. So we may be seeing a lot more activity, which has implications for the broader investment community, the overall market price, and the fintech community, quite honestly. I got a feeling we're going to be talking about this one, along with a couple of other things, on Wednesday's Credit CU Town Hall. That's taking place, if you're listening right as this thing drops, you still have a chance to join us live, Wednesday, June 11th, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. As I say, I'm sure the Circle topic will come up. I think there's a lot to be said on that one. I think we're also going to be talking about regulatory developments, very specifically one that's tucked inside the big, beautiful bill, as it's called, the tax and spending bill that's working its way, already approved by the House and now being considered by the Senate, who are making some changes to it. There is a provision in there which I just can't even figure out how it qualifies as part of the budget bill, but it refers to placing a moratorium on any regulatory constraints on artificial intelligence for a 10-year period, including at the state level, which I find particularly interesting. And it's one of those that kind of creates some interesting kind of questions about both governmental efficiency and how people, how the division of state power versus federal power. But from a banking standpoint, we always talk about the fact that it is very, very difficult to try to follow 50 different state regulations. You'd far rather see something done at the federal level. On the other hand, if the federal level is not going to do anything, the states, I would think, have the opportunity or the right, I could argue, that they should be able to do something on their own. Then again, artificial intelligence, almost by definition, is an interstate exercise. It's a really interesting one. I think it's also one that's worth having some more conversation. So again, the CU Town Hall, Wednesday, June 11th. It's free to attend. We try to have a very live and interactive conversation. Everybody's welcome to join. You do need to register in advance. You can do that at cutownhall.com. So if you and if you don't hear this before June 11th, go to cutownhall.com. Anyway, we post a link to the replay of those sessions that run about an hour. And while you're there, you can request an invite for the next one that comes up. I think we're going back to about a monthly cadence for the summer months, but we typically do them a little more often than that. The other big news that came up this past week was and we talked about this last week, and the breaking news came just after we recorded last week's episode, Illinois' Interchange Fee Prohibition Act. This is a classic case of legislators kicking the can down the road. At the 11th hour, 11 hours and 59 minutes or whatever, they granted a 1-year extension on this rule that was going to exempt gratuities and taxes from interchange, which is a lot easier said than done when you know the machinations and the plumbing of the system. It was supposed to go into effect July 1st of this year. That's now been pushed out for a year. As I think about it, was really the only rational outcome. There was no way anybody was going to get this in place. They've dug a nice hole for themselves. Even the court cases that have already been that are under consideration now creates an even further unlevel playing field, because certain groups of banks were not going to be hit with this, including the largest national banks, but Illinois state chartered banks of the state that actually put the law in place would be. Credit unions, broadly, all federal credit unions would still be. Anyway, it's now on hold, so nothing's going to be happening. I would say, I don't want to say this, but I'd say we're now likely in something of a holding pattern, pending some resolution of some of these court decisions to create some clarity. And then, frankly, government just likes to wait for deadlines before they do something. So this could kind of go into the back burner now until we get closer to the 2026 deadline. That's the reality of it. That doesn't mean we can take it off our radar, because I'm sure there will be lobbying going on the other side, sneak attacks to try to get it through in another fashion. Another one that I think is worthy of talking about, and we'll probably do some of that too. Anyway, on to our interview with the Georgia FinTech Academy. Jonathan Godbey, a lot of great data here, a lot of good insights, and let's just, I'll let Jonathan describe it himself. I'm here with Jonathan Godbey, who is a finance professor at Georgia State University and somebody that I've been working closely with for the last, how long has it been, Jonathan? 3-4 years?
At least, probably more than that, Glenn. I think you were one of my first interviews for my Foundations of FinTech course. That was probably in 2020.
Time flies. Yeah, that's right, because we were doing it remotely. Exactly.
Right.
But the most recent thing that we've really dug in on together is this survey that's become kind of an integral part of one of your classes as part of the Georgia FinTech Academy around consumer behavior and perceptions toward financial institutions. So I thought it was a great opportunity to kind of get together and give a snapshot of where this all stands. So thanks for taking the time.
Oh, sure. Glad to.
So let's just start. The Georgia FinTech Academy is a pretty unique beast. And it spans the 26 different schools in the University of Georgia system. Can you kind of just say a little bit about what your objectives are and how it got started?
Right. It's very unique. Our first classes were in the spring of 2020. So things started out great in January, and then we were, of course, hit with COVID that very first semester. But it gives an opportunity to students throughout the university system. And there, like you said, there are 26 schools, and anybody at those different institutions is able to take one of the Georgia FinTech Academy classes. And the goal is to get students ready to go into jobs in the FinTech industry in Atlanta and in Georgia. We have 5 core courses, and we add other ones, but the 5 core courses, there's a Foundations of FinTech, a banking and fintech, a financial technologies, a cybersecurity one, and then a data analytics one.
And I mean, one of the keys to me is one of the things, whether or not, if you take the full course, you get, is it a certification? Is that, it's not actually a major per se, correct?
Right. It's not a major per se, and your university will give you a certificate, or you may have like I guess it's really a concentration and certificate, but it depends on the university itself. But basically what we're doing is we're trying to get you as a student ready to go in day one and have an understanding of what fintech really is. And that makes it more exciting and challenging to teach because this is not like my traditional intro finance class. The principles are the same that they've been forever. But this class changes constantly. So I have a whole module on current events. I don't know what I'm going to talk about in my summer course in that module yet.
Yeah, good, really good, especially this year. That's right. And the thing I'm assuming you might get a slightly wider diversity of students. I mean, this is not, when people hear fintech, they often hear tech. And so it's not just the
Right.
coding and programming. You're talking about the financial aspects. You need people who understand this from a product management standpoint, from a communications and marketing standpoint, and you're getting a little bit of, I mean, I think it's valuable no matter where you go into the working world from there.
Right. So we have a financial technologies course that leans more toward technology. And then we have my foundations of fintech course that leans more toward the fin and fintech. So I really try in my course to focus on the first principles, the things that never change, and say, this is what you have to have an understanding of. And then, yeah, here are the technologies that we have and how we're using them and how things have evolved. But look, it's the same thing. Banking is the same when the Medici family first started modern banking in the 1500s.
We're really going back.
Yeah, we're trying to accomplish the same goals. It's just we can do things more efficiently.
Yeah. So you mentioned basically 5-year anniversary and another nice milestone, 10,000 different students at this point have taken these classes. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's really fun teaching them. Uh, we have students with all kinds of backgrounds. I have students who are the traditional college student. I have students who are coming back. I think my oldest student was probably in his 60s.
Wow.
Yeah, and just hey, this one he said, I'm just interested in fintech. I'm retired, probably not going to work anywhere, but I just want to learn.
That's really cool. And remind me again, because I want to get into the survey that we worked on together and the classes used it. Because of what you just described, is this for the foundations or the data analytics class? Which one is it plugged
This
into?
is for the foundation. So one of the things that we like to emphasize is experiential learning. And I've done several projects with different individual companies, but really at the foundations level, what I found like if I could find a challenge statement that my students could answer, and then they could present it to people in industry where it's not just solving the problem of one company, but it's something to be interested in the value to an array of companies. That's what I wanted to do and kind of have my students take their first crack at a real world assignment. And I say, this is not a high school project. We're trying to generate brand new data, something that no one knows, and something hopefully that has value to every bank in the state and every fintech in the state is something that people want to know.
Yeah, and I think the feedback that we've gotten and the curiosity we've gotten from the banking and financial institution community really shows that already. Now, at this point, and let me step back again. When you first kind of approached me on this, and we kind of worked with the students, worked among ourselves, and kind of worked on the survey instrument, you said, "Yeah, I want to get 1,000 or 2,000 people." Actually, I'm like, "That's great. That's a great aspiration. I don't think we're going to come close to that. I think we'll get a couple hundred." You were a lot closer than I was. And what did we have? Is it about 1,800 that have responded on each cycle?
Yeah. So in our first, I did this in summer of 24. We got a little over 1,600. And then I did this in fall of 24 and spring of 25. So we made a slight change. We kind of upgraded the survey for fall 24 and spring 25. Combined, we had 4,102 respondents in those 2 semesters.
So, I mean, and that to me, and the nice thing about that is you can break it up into subgroups demographically and still have statistically significant numbers, which is what I find so impressive about, this opportunity that we have. And we're, like you say, we're still, it's still relatively early stages. We're still iterating. You don't want to move the survey too much because you want to have time series data to see how it moves, but we have the opportunity to kind of probe a bit further and try to get to the specific questions that really resonate with people.
Right. I think the goal is, like you said, to have some questions that never change so we can see how opinions and attitudes change over time. But then there are new things that come up constantly. So, we'll add questions as we see fit that may respond to current events.
So part of the key to this is the students are actually responsible. I think with every student, you kind of task them with getting 20 responses. Am I remembering correctly?
So I play a little bit of a game with them. I say, I want you to get 20 responses in order to get credit for this assignment. But then I say if the class as a whole gets a certain number, around 2,000, it depends on how many students are in the class. If the class as a whole gets 2,000, then we're good and we can stop. So both times the class as a whole has met my goal. So what we do is, I thought of this like, well, what can my students do that will kind of get them excited and get them kind of to understand what we're trying to do, and rather than give them results of some survey that someone else did. So let them do the survey. And I thought, well, this is not going to be perfectly scientific from if I'm designing a survey, I want everything exactly right, but I can overwhelm it with large numbers, and that will give me results that I can depend on. So the students are all from, well, they're all enrolled in universities in the state of Georgia. They come from all over the world because it's not just Georgia State. It could be like University of West Georgia, North Georgia, Kennesaw, Valdosta State. So if they're giving out about 20 surveys each to their friend and family group, and I said, I want to have, I think you and I talked about this, we really want to have an understanding of Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm about half Gen Z and then I have other generations. And kind of one interesting random fact, we have 28 people out of that 4,000 from the silent generation that was born before 1945. So
And it's
I may
also
mention
important,
them.
it's important to point out that this is an online survey. So it's 28 people who got online and actually filled out the survey too.
That is, yeah. So that's a good point because you have to think everybody that filled this out online, though it was probably given to them by a friend or family member. So there may be some help
Yeah, that's a good point.
with
They might
that.
be sitting behind them and actually help them click through. And
Yeah.
then, I always like to try to make sure we put the proper caveats on this one too. But like I say, I think this is incredibly valuable. I like the way you kind of mention it too, kind of, overwhelm it with the numbers. But, we tried to oversample, and I think roughly half of the sample overall is Gen Z, but that still leaves us with multiple hundreds in all the other categories, the boomers, the Gen X's, the Gen Y's, et cetera. Now, I think this is not a purely random sample, and you've mentioned, I think we are heavily weighted toward first generation students for the most part, I think, if I'm not mistaken, at Georgia State, which is the majority
Yeah.
of the students.
So real quick, I'll give you the numbers by generation. We have about 2,100 Gen Z. We have almost 800 millennial and almost 800 Gen X. And we have over 300 baby boomers and then our 28 silent generation. And one of the, I think, strengths of Georgia State is its diversity. And it really helped with this project because we have students literally from all over the world. We have students from all different types of backgrounds. And then when I expand this to my students who are taking it online at a Kennesaw or Valdosta State, we have students from all over the state of Georgia. So I think I can confidently say everyone is represented in this.
So let's dive into some of the findings, which to me it's a nice combination of validation of things we don't know that we think we already know, and then some pretty surprising ones too.
So,
Mobile first, but pretty much everyone's mobile. I mean, every age bracket is to some extent really engaging on a mobile first basis with their institution, correct?
right. And that's, we ask them, were they mobile or online versus with a computer? And Gen Z, they're 76% online with a mobile device. Very few of them want to go in person. And that, of course, we expect Gen Z to be the dominant one in that. But the millennials, the Gen X, they also use online.
My recollection is even the boomers are over 50%, right? I mean,
The boomers are 56% online.
And again, that's primarily the question. I think is how do you prefer to engage?
Yeah, it's primarily or prefer. I forget the exact word we use there, but that's their primary way to engage. And then originally we thought, well, nobody wants a physical branch anymore. That's kind of the conventional wisdom. And then if people are using everything online, they don't need a physical branch. But to me, the biggest surprise, no, everybody wants a physical branch. About 2/3 of our respondents overall wanted to have that physical location. It was important to them. So we said rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. So when I'm looking at, when I say important, is people are rated a 4 or a 5, about 2/3. And then you would think, oh, well, that's because it's all the older people they're saying. But Gen Z was almost exactly on average with the rest. So 67% of Gen Z says it's important to have a physical branch.
And that's to me the big takeaway there, at least if I can, kind of jump out of purely looking at the data and kind of interpreting it, is maybe I don't want to go into it all the time, but it gives me a comfort level to know it's there if I need to, or just to prove that it's a real place and not some weird, kind of online invention.
And that's what I found. So when I talk to my students who are a majority Gen Z, I said, help this make sense to me. And I I spent time with the individual teams, so this is not some information cascade where one person hears and they all say the same thing. But in separate focus group type environments with my students, they all said basically the same thing as what you said. I want to know that that branch exists. I want to know that I can go there if there's trouble. Like if there's something that weird comes up that I have to take care of, I want to be able to know I can go in. But also, if I see it, like you said, it's real. So
Yeah.
I trusted that bank. And trust is a huge with your money, right? I mean, I don't have to trust, my phone company or cable company maybe, but I really need to trust my bank.
And that's, again, like you said, it's not necessarily an easy answer for the, for the how the financial institution responds to this. Obviously, branches are important. You can't get rid of them, but they're expensive, and it doesn't mean you're going to get a whole lot of traffic in them. It may mean you can spread them out a little bit further. I don't know what the sweet spot is. I mean, you don't have to be able to walk to a branch, but you probably want to make sure you can get to one within a X-minute drive or something like that. Maybe that's a question at some point we can add to the survey.
It may be, and just a little beyond the survey, but when I talked to students about that, they didn't like the idea of, I've heard some banks having a coffee shop with a branch. Most of my students said, I want a real branch. I want something that looks imposing like banks traditionally are,
That is
right?
interesting. I had that, and I had not heard that. That's you're hitting me with new information right here. That is because that definitely seems to be a way to generate some more traffic, but that might not be the vibe, as they say, that they want.
And that's where I want to dive into more of this is like, was that the opinion of only the handful of students I talked to, or is that I think that's something that people don't really know I want, maybe subconsciously, I want to know that that big brick and mortar thing is there and it just makes me feel better.
You must have to have the pillars like they used to in the representations you still see online when someone just looks up a picture of a bank.
I do. I've been in some rural areas where I saw a bank that was a trailer and like a mobile home. I'm like, well, you could just hook up a truck and steal the entire branch. I don't know that I feel good about
That's
this.
a good point. Yeah, and I remember that this was a surprise to me as well. And again, particularly with Gen Z, when we asked about what their level of trust is of different types of, the large national institutions that everybody knows by name, the smaller community ones, the credit unions, and the digital banks. And the digital banks came out on the bottom.
Right. So, and I would also say that the income levels for the physical location, we did income levels and there's no real difference to them. Just to make that point. So when we ask how rate on a level of 1 to 5, how safe you feel, how much you trust a community bank, a large national bank, a credit union, an online bank. So when I look at a 4 or 5, which is saying that, yeah, I trust them, it's roughly 50% for community, large, and credit union. Online banks plummet to 30%.
Yeah, that's really, to me, that's the kind of stuff that I find fascinating. And that's, yeah, the other piece, and we've kind of touched on it already, is the variation between Gen Z and just even any of these. And I'll leave the silent generation out because the sample we have is so small. That's the one that we dug in. And then I know you've added the income levels in the more recent versions of this. It doesn't show as big of a variation as we expected. I mean, I admit I was very surprised by that.
No, so when you look at when I average, and this is again the question, how safe do you think your, in this case, online bank is? Scale of 1 to 5. When I look at the average, it goes from a 2.78 to a 2.98. And millennials actually trust the online bank more than Gen Z. But I mean, it's not a big difference. And when I look at income scales, it's all in the same range. It's 2.91 to 2.99. So you're looking at that, there's not a big difference. Like you could say in maybe oversimplified, nobody trusts an online bank.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And
But
go ahead.
and that goes to the physical location. And I think this, I'm a little wary about, I know anybody can build a website and we could start the Jonathan and Glen bank tomorrow. I mean, not legally, but like we could put up a website that looked like a bank tomorrow. And then, I want to have some proof, some credible signal. And this goes back, I think, to some signaling theory from finance. I want a credible signal that you're real. And that credible signal is spending money on a big physical location.
It's interesting that I believe if things continue on the pace that they're on right now, Chime, an online bank, is scheduled, I believe, to have its IPO probably about a day or two after this episode is going to post online. And I suspect they're going to have a nice little performance of their stock as they go out of the gate. It'll be interesting, but one of the things I always think about is they can show, and it's one thing if you're taking out a loan. I think it's a lot easier to get comfortable to take money from an online institution. It's a little bit
Oh, good
different to
point.
put it on deposit with that institution. And again, I'm not knocking the SoFis and the Chimes of the world. They've done a great job, particularly on that side of the equation. But to get people to actually treat them as their primary day-to-day institution, I think is still a tougher putt.
I think that's the thing, the primary financial institution. So if that's my primary bank, I want to know how I can contact them when something strange happens.
Exactly, exactly. Two other things you've mentioned before that I think are good takeaways, just quickly want to get into here. Financial education. There's actually, I think, again, this is one that we think we know, but we help document that there is an appetite for it.
Right, about 2/3 of the people responded with a 4 or 5 saying that financial education was important for the bank. And when I talk to, and again, this is Gen Z heavy, when I talk to my students, and these are finance majors, they all feel like they need that personal financial education because we're teaching them corporate finance or how banks are run. We're not teaching them, for the most part, at any university in the country, uh, personal financial management. So they all want it. And when I look at across generation, um, that holds. Now the silent generation, they basically said they don't want any financial education. They're good. Um, and that does have a little bit more of Gen Z wanting it a little bit more than the other generations.
But yeah, that you pointed out something I hadn't thought about that's really telling. You're talking about, your focus group are, people who are taking a finance class. They're college students taking a finance class and they're still interested in it. So that's pretty telling. And
Right.
we've had other folks on here that I'm guessing, based on what you just said, even like the boomers or the millennial or the Gen X, I guess is the next wave. There's so much confusion around retirement that I'm guessing that they're still pretty hungry for it as well.
Right. So millennials are about 64%, Gen X and the baby boomers, they're 55,
Yeah.
57%. So they want it. And I think there's a real opportunity for banks to do financial education. And the financial education programs I've seen, quite frankly, are boring.
Yeah.
I think there's a huge opportunity for someone to come in and make something fun and educational at the same time. Now, how you can make financial education fun? Uh, if you know
Gamification.
how to do yeah, gamification is the key. Have some ideas on how to make financial education gamified and fun. Uh, but it will be difficult to do.
The other one that I think surprised both of us, P2P, and we got different ways. I think of Venmo as the way that young people pay, but Zelle seems to be kind of really taking a leading role across all the different brackets.
Zelle has really changed. So when I first started teaching this in 2020, one of my questions, by the way, I occasionally have an in-person class. Most are online, and the way I do the online is we have Zoom calls and they're synchronous. So you're actually, for the most part, you're actually in the class with me. So I'll ask questions for people to put in the chat, just to make sure the students are paying attention. And one of those questions has always been, what peer-to-peer payment app do you and your people use? And no one said Zelle. That
This is
didn't
2020.
even 2020. It might as well not even existed. There was Venmo, there was Cash App, there was PayPal, but then sometime over the last few years, Zelle has dominated, and I'd say everybody, that is by far the most dominant one, and that's what our survey results show as well. I don't know that exact number on that, but that was the
That,
number one. That was
that's
the number one
yeah,
choice.
it was, and I think it wasn't even just like a plurality. I think it was literally a majority, if I'm not mistaken. We can confirm that later on, but I can kind of add that in. But that was, again, if I think about the big surprises that popped out of this. So you're going to be doing this again in the fall. I guess we'll do a couple of little updates in terms of refinements or additional things we want to probe on. But
Yeah.
one of the reasons we're doing this is we want the financial community to have access to this kind of information. So if people want to find out more, I mean, is it the FinTech Academy? Is it reaching out to you directly? What's the best way?
Reach out to me directly if you have uh, questions you would like to have included. If you want to discuss any of this, just send me an email. It's jgodbey@gsu.edu, or the easy way is to go to GSU's website and search my name, and my email will come up.
Great, and I'll post a link to the Georgia FinTech Academy, and I'll add your email into the list. And I'm assuming you, I know I'll be there. I'm pretty sure you'll be at FinTech South in the middle of August, and we'll be more than happy to kind of walk people through the details there as well.
I will be in and out. That's our first week of class, so I'm going.
That's always interesting.
It's the most inconvenient time for me, so I will be there as much as I can be.
I can certainly at least take the first part of questions and pass them along to you as necessary. Jonathan Godbey,
great, Glenn.
Professor from Georgia State and the Georgia FinTech Academy. Can look forward to continuing to work with you on this and sharing these outputs. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
So we really intend for this to be a valuable resource for the overall banking, credit union, fintech community. And it's not specific. I continue to want to emphasize a true, serious hardcore market research company will say this is not a statistically valid panel. You can't claim, and I think Jonathan makes a really good point. There are, it's not perfectly representative of the population. However, the numbers that we've actually managed to attract as far as the sheer volume of data, I think overcomes a lot of that and leaves, you can find all kinds of studies out there that will basically kind of lead you to different conclusions. I don't claim this is the final word. I do think it has some very interesting input that's worthy of putting into the overall dialogue. So there are more insights on this than we've published. As Jonathan mentioned, there's already been a couple more cycles of the survey that go beyond the time that we used for the data that we've published. We're able to further slice and dice the data if there's people with specific interest. And we're very much open to adding questions of interest to that the community thinks might be valuable in terms of understanding the behaviors. Because, again, as Jonathan said, this is something that is a living, breathing document and an exercise he intends to do with his class on a regular basis a couple times a year. And I'll also mention to you, I'm not going to bother mentioning a name, but one of our colleagues in the credit union space who saw the winning team present their findings said, wow, I would put this team in front of my CEO anytime. So the group that's actually done some of the data analysis from the FinTech Academy at the student level and it's a graduate level course, but it's really impressive. And love to share more of that information. Love to get more of your input. In short, get in touch. We got Jonathan's email in the show notes, and you know where to find me if you want to ask me as well. With that, another episode of the podcast and the big cast in the books. My name is Glen Sarvati at 154 Advisors. John Best is our grand poobah at the Best Innovation Group, where you can track down the folks who love to do things, cool things for financial institutions, credit unions, and fintech companies, particularly in the artificial intelligence, voice response, all the really cool technology stuff the credit unions have going on. Check us out, big-fintech.com. Check out the CU Town Hall, cutownhall.com. You'll always find old episodes of the old. They're not old, they're just well well seasoned of the podcast. Past episodes available if you go to the media tab on the website. You'll also find us on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, etc. We usually have new content every Tuesday, and we will next week too. So I hope you'll check back in or hit a reminder or a subscription or whatever, so it just gets automatically, you get alerted as soon as it's available. Again, my name is Glen Sarvati. Always love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of these ideas. And as always, thanks for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big FinTech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.